everyone, and welcome to episode number 20. Yeah, that's right. 20 weeks of fun and over 20 hours of fun, because some of our episodes have gone longer than an hour, of UCF Business Talk Live. My name is Roger Phipps. I am the COO and co-founder of Seven Lights Marketing Agency, Bird Eye View Inc., Boss Leadership Solutions, a few other businesses, and your consultant for everything business, leadership, ops, tech, and lending, including business lending. This week, we have a huge show for you. We're talking all about the pivot. You hear about us talk about the pivot all the time. You hear us say pivot in the middle of the conversations. And, one of the things that I was kind of running through recently was why it's important to pivot, when it's important to pivot, and how do we do it? So to help me with that this week, I've got Josh Lazar. Let's welcome him into the show. Hey. Josh Lazar, welcome back.
Hey, it's great to be here. And I'm the one that loves yelling pivot, but there's someone in another room. I might have to keep it down today, but we'll have a lot of pivot moments, I believe.
A lot of pivoting going on this week.
Yeah.
Well, kind of like what I was talking about before, this week is all about, understanding when to change course. Business is never a linear proposition, no matter what level you're in, whether you're a Fortune 500 company or a small business just trying to start out. You constantly have to pivot to either in reaction to external factors or internal factors. And we'll talk a little bit about both of those. And to kind of start that conversation, let's talk about some big examples from history. So, if you've gone to UCF for business school, you may have heard of some of these, but history is fraught with different examples of industries that have been rocked, traditional industries that have been around for 75 years, that have been rocked by pivots in technology. One of those, just off the top of my head, is going to be Kodak. For those of you that remember Kodak used to have these little shops where they had your film, and you took your film there with your camera. And one of the engineers there at Kodak decided, hey, I've got this cool idea. What if we could digitize imagery? And the folks at Kodak, they got it ready, got a prototype ready, gave it to the folks at Kodak, and they laughed at him and said, hey, this is never going to catch on, blah, 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 blah. And it ended up putting them out of business with the digital revolution. Then another example that's near and dear to all of our hearts when we Netflix and chill is Netflix, right? So Netflix, most of you are too young to remember, started as a mail order service. So you used to go to a Blockbuster and you would go there and you would pick out your tapes or DVDs, whatever era you were in, and hope that the new release was out there. You rent it, and then if you didn't rewind it, you got charged an exorbitant fee. And what Netflix said, well, instead of you having to come to our store, let's do this way more lean, and we'll just mail it to people. So that's what Netflix did. So Netflix started moving, and then all of a sudden they said, okay, since we're running so lean, we have the warehouses and we have the mail, this thing called the internet came along, and they said, why couldn't we use that to stream movies and shows and whatever? And so Netflix was born, and lo and behold, Blockbuster was gone. So again, these are examples, some very famous ones of different things that have happened that have caused businesses to go out of business. And right now, for those of you that are paying attention to real estate, the real estate model is being completely disrupted as well. There's a ton of lawsuits that are out there that basically are against most of the large real estate brokerages, the NAR, which holds the National Association of Realtors, and MLS. And basically what's happening is Zillow is trying to disrupt the market by transitioning the buy side of the transaction. So when you go buy a home, to technology and their platform. So Redfin has already jumped off of NAR and MLS, and they're all trying to migrate that. The way they accomplished that was through the court system. So there's a bunch of different ways that this can happen, and we'll talk about that legal issue portion. But there's external factors, and then later on in the show, we'll talk about internal factors. Josh, are there any examples that you can think of from your side that would be pertinent to this?
Yeah, so well, I just one note. So the Eastman Kodak Company did go under bankruptcy, but they are still a bit of a thriving company. They made about $1 billion in 2022, so they're not completely out of business. But they've kind of gotten to the business of selling their name and slapping it on some stuff, plus other finishes and prints and stuff like that. But just like Blockbuster, which, if I remember correctly, had the opportunity to buy either Netflix or a share of Netflix.
They were going to buy them, yeah.
They were going to buy Netflix for like $50 million or something way, way, way early on, and they didn't. And you saw who won that. Kodak probably could have gotten further than Nikon and a couple of other companies that went hard on digital cameras. So anyway, I just wanted to note that if you see that iconic K, it's still around, just not commercial, right? You don't see, no one's like, let's go get a Kodak DSLR. That's just not as prevalent.
No, they're doing primarily stuff like, okay, if I want to go to Walgreens or CVS or something and go get some photographs printed, right? That's what they're doing, which is much, much smaller than what they were doing before.
Oh, yeah.
All kiosk styles.
The flair there. So a couple of other, I think the most well-known one would be Amazon. I mean, Amazon's first initial business was to sell books online, and they had that A to Z with the arrow. If you didn't realize that little smile-looking thing is an arrow, everything from A to Z is kind of where they've gone from there. But Amazon was just selling books online, and now they sell everything online, and they've disrupted a lot of industries too. They've become an industry themselves with a lot of sub-brands and business owners and things working on there, but there's some things happening with them too in the court systems as well. And I would say, so Uber and those companies are trying to disrupt Mears and other taxi companies and liveries. Airbnb is trying to use some of that.
I mean, they have. I mean, in the city of New York, they've literally put financial institutions out of business because the medallions. So these folks these taxi cab drivers, they would get loans for these medallions that were worth $350,000. And basically what they are is they're a license for you to be a cab driver in the city of New York, and they have value. So they were an asset. Well, as soon as all these ride sharing platforms, Lyft and Uber and everybody else came in, those medallions basically became worthless.
Yeah.
So it caused a lot of people to go out, a lot of taxi drivers to go out of business.
Yeah.
It was like the 2008 crash all over again. You bought a house at $550,000 and now it's worth $250,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's not a traditional pivot, but like Blockbuster didn't pivot and things happened, right?
Well, that's the point, is like, that's the point of what I'm trying to make as to why you need to pivot. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if you are a small organization or a large one, because those large organizations, you have to understand the business enough and what's going on outside of it, inside of it, and from a technology standpoint, to understand when you need to pivot. Otherwise, you'll be left in the dust. If you do not change, you'll either have at the least less business. At the worst, you'll be out of business, and nobody's immune. You can be a Fortune 500 company and still be immune. So we talked about some examples, right? I'd like to start off with legal issues. So one of the things that I kind of alluded to was the real estate market. And those of you that are paying attention, there's this huge lawsuit. It's a class action lawsuit. The Northeast, I believe it's NMLS. I don't know if it's the NMLS. No, the Northeast NRA, National Realtors Association. They were the first plaintiff to actually pay, and they paid $80 million for this lawsuit, this class action lawsuit. $20 million of which was used to go and market to potential class participants for others, right? So all of the major brokers are being are basically being sued, and what they're alleging is basically the buyer in a real estate transaction typically pays, or the seller pays for the buyer's agent, right? And that's a fixed cost. It's 3% on one side, 3% on the other side, whatever you guys negotiate. Well, that's fixed into the purchase. So basically what they said is it's not competitive. It's antitrust to do that. So now the buy side of the transaction, where buyers never paid for that cost, it was always part of the seller's cost. The seller can say, I'm not paying for that anymore. So all of those agents that were out there and listing and doing all of those other things, your money is not guaranteed anymore. So there's an inflection point right now and a pivot point for the industry where some very, very large brokerage firms that you're aware of are paying $50 million, and making promises that they're not going to do that. At the same time, Zillow's like, well, don't pay them. Come to a SaaS model or a technology model and pay for our service. And then you can do it all digitally without a buyer, without a buyer's agent. However, it's just like a car. Yeah. When you have a car, right, and you buy at Carvana or CarMax or car whatever app, insert whatever car app here, when you buy it online, statistically, you're going to pay about 20% more than if you went and negotiated in a dealership. Now, if you didn't negotiate at all and you just went and paid sticker, then no. But typically, you're going to pay about 20% more for that convenience. Zillow's hoping for the same thing. And they're hoping to drive traffic to their platform because they really don't have a way to monetize it. And in my opinion, that just doesn't work. There's too much nuance. Being able to show the listing, being able to do all that. There was this big craze, and do you remember in 2005, 2006, 2007, when the market was super hot, what was happening?
Yeah.
There was all of these sell it yourself folks.
For sell by owner. Yeah.
For sell by owner. And what ended up happening? Most people ended up getting less for their house than what they would have with a real estate agent, even paying for that. But again, that's a case where the judiciary is driving a wholesale change. And a lot of these companies, their models can't handle that. Yeah. And they're not going to be able to pivot. So it's not just about pivot. It's not just about understanding when you're going to pivot, but also as a business owner, you need to position yourself so that you can pivot, right? So be familiar with what's happening in your particular industry or field. Make sure you're aware. You should be doing a SWOT analysis at least once a year. And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It's in a grid, right? If you don't know what it is, look it up. That should be part of your plan every year. And you should be taking time every year to come up with a new plan. And then those threats, right, and those opportunities, you need to be keyed in on those in the industry news and periodicals that are having, so you can pivot and you'll be aware of it before you do. Josh, do you have any other examples from a legal perspective that you can think of, or maybe on a small business type scale? Like, because I could see this even with the real estate side. Most of these brokerages, you've got the large national guys, but all these individual brokerages that are owned by realtors and it may be 10 agents or something like that. Yeah. Guess what? They have to pivot too, and they don't have the resources of a very large organization. It completely changes their income stream.
This sounds like an area I should go into with a technology solution, right?
Well, if you want to partner with me, you can.
There you go. We're getting deals done live, right? So nothing is popping directly to mind. I'm sure there are lots of examples, but that one sounds pretty pertinent, because if you're taking
here's another one for you.
Okay.
Tobacco.
Oh yeah,
remember all the legislation that went with tobacco and cigarettes and everything else? So what ended up happening, right? All those things changed. The cost of cigarettes went way up, manufacturing went way down, and they had to introduce technology, which is where you got the vape pens. And so go ahead.
The other side too, marijuana, right? From illegal to legal kind of shifts or creates a new market, or kind of shifts some of the same people who are used to taking items like that and producing it in mass, like a Philip Morris or anything, or RJ Reynolds or anything like that. They either have a new market to go into, or new people are building it. It's pivoting from where I think Altria or something. There's a couple of some north of the border that are growing into that area. So sometimes legal issues can shift a market to create it or make it different too, because that's, I mean, how many people thought that marijuana would be sold openly in states like a decade ago?
So here's another example of what you're talking about that people may or may not be familiar with. So about 5 or so years ago, there's legislation that everybody's familiar with the American with Disabilities Act, right? So that was done a long time ago. And so that, if you're not familiar with it, that's why we have parking spaces out front that are designated. That's why your doors have to be 24 or 36 inches wide. I can't remember.
I think.
Yeah, 36 inches wide. So they're wheelchair accessible. You have to have ramps, all these different things that were done to make, make businesses accessible. Well, about 5 or 6 years ago, they brought that into the digital storefront too, which is websites. Mm-hmm. So what a website actually is for a business is a digital storefront. So if someone can't leverage your website, so think they may have an issue where they can't hear as well, or vision is a challenge, or they may have epilepsy. There are a lot of different things that are out there, and there was a movement based on the WCAG, which is the World Conference something action group or something like that, which basically set the standards for websites and what was accessible. Well, everybody kind of ignored them for a really long time, and people didn't do any of this stuff, right? So all of a sudden,
unless you were government and had to go by Section 508 for rules, typically.
Yes. Yeah, right. For the government, yes, but yes. I'm talking about private industry. Right?
I know. I'm just saying, like, there are some people who had to, until you had to. Not a lot of people were doing this, right? So, but that's
why did they have to though? It wasn't because it was because of enforcement, right? So there's not anything in the ADA that was changed, but it was an interpretation of the ADA through lawsuits that changed it. So people like Burger King were sued, Beyonce were sued, the NFL were sued, and there was this whole micro industry in the legal profession where basically if they would look for certain things, and if those certain things were on a website, you got a letter that says, "Hey, you're in violation. You need to pay us $5,000."
Yeah,
right.
Just I have some stories about that. If it's good to go into story time.
Well, let's kind of keep it high level because we've got a lot to cover.
Sure.
But going back to your point, it created a micro industry because now you had to be accessible, right? Not compliant, accessible. And there's a lot of different things that go into it. Most small business owners don't know anything about it, and their websites aren't accessible, right? You can get fined. You will eventually get from a lawyer. And if you don't fix it, then you can go, they up it. It goes from 5,000 to 10,000 to 50,000. And they can do legal injunctions against you, right? So at the end of the day, it's best just to make it accessible. And what happened then? Well, Google decided we want to encourage accessibility. So they actually started docking your rankings if you were not accessible. So things like ARIA labels or, all of those things. And they started rewarding you in their Google search results. So it changed an entire industry by doing that and making those websites accessible. All right, I'm going to take a step back. What were you going to say?
I'll be brief. As some of you might know, I've been a CIO in a previous role, IT directors and those type of things. And I was working in a judicial circuit here in Florida. And within the last 3 or so years, something like that micro industry popped up, but it was a little more aggressive than you would expect. They would go to a website, go through the Section 508 rules, see if you have anything that didn't hit. If you had something that didn't hit, they'd sue you. And they'd start going they basically go county to county. They'd start with the county. And
it's like an ambulance chaser model.
They go to the city. Well, they go to the cities, the small cities, then the bigger cities, then the county it's in, then they go to the judiciary, the circuit court, the clerk of the court, the state, the public defender, the state attorney's office, the police, the every single government organization in that county, and they start suing them. And they did it to the point where a couple people started to pay, and of course, not saying lawsuits are the same as spam. Some are, but there were so many and so targeted, and some of them were not even legitimate. Like they were a small fixable thing, not a you're not doing your job under Section 508 rules. That after one or two paid and it started ratcheting up, cities and counties and other government agencies basically said enough, grouped, band together. I won't say band together, but kind of saying, no, this is not what this was meant for. These lawsuits are frivolous, and started pushing back. And it ended because a lot of the lawsuits were frivolous. Now, here's the thing. The reason I say that is if that was working well to some point in one part of Florida.
Oh, it was everywhere. Yeah. It was nationally.
So like you were saying, if that works there, a government giving up $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000, depending on what branch and what you do, could be a lot, could be a little. If they start doing the same things in mass to businesses, small, medium, or large, they're probably going to get a lot of money.
Hey, listen, depending on the size of the website, you can design a whole new website for that same amount of money. So why would you waste it on that? Why wouldn't you make it an accessible website? Why wouldn't you spend the $10,000 to $15,000 on a good design that is accessible? Because look, 1 in 5, I think it's 1 in 5 Americans has some form of accessibility challenge, right? And that's 20%. So why would you cut off 20% of your potential customers on your digital storefront by not having something that's accessible? And you also get advantages in SEO, SEM when it comes to that as well. And you've heard me talk about that before. But Google and Bing and everybody else, they reward you for being accessible. So again, it not only changed the website for the better, right? The web experience for the better, but it also changed Google and how they did things. So again, there's just so many reasons to do it the right way and make your website accessible. I mean, it could be, what if you threw somebody into an epileptic fit because you had something that was strobing or flashing on your website? Yeah. Which was being done on videos.
Yeah, well, that was Pokemon, right? In Japan. I don't know if you know some of the origins of Pokemon in Japan. Like there was an episode of Pokemon back in probably the late 90s or early 2000s. I forgot which it was. That was literally on TV one time and never shown again because it sent like 800 people to the hospital with epileptic seizures. And that's not a website, of course, but you are right. It's interesting because I will say that I have seen website accessibility in my industry. There is a company, it's not us. They are kind of going all in on providing consulting on how to have your website be more accessible, which I think is great.
Okay, so I'll say this. We built an entire company, the last fintech we were in around this. Okay, that's why I know a lot about this. I got a certification in it. We had an accessibility person that was on the Silver Task Force. And because it's not just the website itself, but it's anything on the website. And it only takes one mistake. So for example, if you put a PDF up there that wasn't accessible, reading order, most of them aren't if you just download one, reading order, etc. So it doesn't work with a screen reader. Guess what? You're not accessible. Your whole website's not accessible and you're open for a fine. So again, there's so many reasons to do it. And let's get off of this subject. So I don't want to make the whole show about accessibility guidelines, but it was an example of how, again, judicial changes and legal changes impacted an entire industry and subsequent industries. And Josh texted this or messaged me in the chat. It's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That's what it is. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We also, our marketing team, all of our sites are accessible as well that we produce. So moving on, let's talk about technology that shifts the market. So technology shifts. There's lots of different things in technology. You used a perfect example of it earlier with Uber, right? Using an app, or even just being able to do e-commerce via apps. I mean, think about the revolution of leveraging your iPhone, because that's where the App Store really made its name, and having apps and doing a complete e-commerce solution on your phone. So we kind of have been talking about pivot points and what they are, what we've seen, but the most important part is to be aware of what's going on in your particular industry or vertical or whatever it is that you're doing. So always have industry periodicals, because they're going to be telling you about, and most of them are free. And they'll send them to your inbox, and they'll tell you about regulatory changes. They'll tell you about judicial stuff. They'll tell you about technology, because all these guys that are generating the technology are going to advertise in these periodicals, right? And also conferences. When you go to these conferences, actually listen to what people are saying. The keynote speakers typically will talk about technology in a particular industry. Look at who the presenters are. Actually walk around the show floor. Don't slough it off and go have drinks at the bar with your buddies that you see once a year at the conference. Actually walk the floor and check out what technology's out there, because that technology, even the technology that's being developed, they may not realize what that is going to do for the industry, or other people who are competitors in your particular industry don't realize how they could leverage that technology to create a niche. You're always looking for a niche. So your product chases, in some ways, the technology. Many times you're better off if you can create the change, right? So be the noise instead of being within it. But more often than not, it's the other way around. All right. Go ahead, Josh. You had something to share on this as well.
Yeah. Well, when you're talking about it, I love the idea of going to conferences, going to events that have things that are going on in your industry. I do it all the time. I might be getting to the first time I'm getting to sponsor one, so I'm excited about that. But what I will tell you, for the conferences I've been to, and there's a lot of huge ones actually here in Orlando coming up soon in the tech industry. Actually, one that's Orlando based too. If you're in VR and AR, the Meta Center Global Week is pretty cool too. Coming up next week if you're watching live. But the innovation areas, what? And the innovation corners, the startup areas, though, when you're trying to figure out technology that shifts markets, or the technology that would be bought by other people in the room with the really, really big booths, that's where you're going to see a lot of that. And so
Josh, let me ask you this. When you're in a situation like that, right? One of the big questions is to know, because there's technology coming out all the time.
Yeah.
So which ones are actually going to matter to the industry where it changes your business model? What's the inflection point where you understand and say, this is something either I need to know about, or this is something I need to be attacking?
So what I've seen, at least in the legal industry, is something that either makes billable hours more efficient, or allows you to gain more clients, which is typical of most industries, or something that's really novel, no one has really thought about, and it kind of just explodes and takes over. So in the legal industry, I would say Ross Intelligence and maybe Case Text would be good examples. Ross Intelligence were doing AI-based language models and modeling and machine learning and things like that a while back. And they got caught up in a lawsuit because I believe, if I remember correctly, some of the technologies they were using may have been from other areas, and the lawsuit basically sunk them. But what they were doing was pretty impressive and amazing. I don't know if there was borrowing. There's details I don't know, but they were doing something so novel, they were getting sued over it. And
Yeah, but Josh, how do you know when you should be aware of this or participate and in that pivot point?
so in my opinion, you know when, to me, when they go from the startup alley or the two people to, oh, they're in another booth. If you're going conference to conference, or, oh, you keep hearing things from Series A or other areas if they're doing that, or you hear things around the industry. And I'll use Case Text as a really great example. If you're not familiar with them, it doesn't matter. I believe Thomson Reuters picked them up for $600 or $800 million. The first time I remember seeing Case Text was 2015, 14, somewhere, maybe a little bit later, maybe 16, 17. But in that general time frame, it was two people in one booth that I think was an ABA tech show up in Chicago. I think it was like 2017 or so. And they were just openly giving away whatever they can to just get you onto their system so you can cite cases and look up stuff. And then eventually that booth got bigger. Eventually funding came in. Eventually, et cetera, to the point where at the largest legal technology show now that happened this year, they were bought a couple of weeks before it was closed, and they're in the booth where, like, I don't know what's going to be going on, but Thomson Reuters is down the hall.
All right.
So to me, how you know is being active and knowledgeable of your industry, listening kind of to the rumors that are happening, not necessarily in the educational portion of conferences, but on the sides. That's where I've gotten most of my information. This is why I was pretty aware of like two people merging in my industry a month or so after a conference, because we were having conversations in that innovation alley. I'm like, yeah, if you put one or two of these things together, they would make a pretty big company, and that's exactly what happened.
All right, so I'm gonna try to give you guys some actionable points here, right? So anytime you see someone that goes to a Series A or a Series B round that's more than $10 million, you should be very aware of whatever that technology is. Okay. So Series A, Series B, people will put, they might raise $3 to $5 million, and then it's like it's more like seed money at that point, right? But when you start seeing them raise in excess of $10 million, that means that whoever's giving them that money is investing in their rapid growth. And if they're investing in their rapid growth, they're going to force them to use that money, which means it's got to be a good idea, because if they're throwing that much money after something like that, they really believe in either the technology or whatever it is that's happening. The second thing is look at where they are advertising in those periodicals that we talked about. I'm talking about online periodicals, right? If they're on the main page, if you're seeing them on more than one place on that page, if you're seeing them consistently, not just for a quarter or a month or whatever, make sure you're looking at that. Press releases. There'll be consistent press releases about that particular technology that'll be in industry periodicals as well. So you can kind of trace that. If you see someone's name consistently, that means they didn't burn out of cash and they're gone. And then when you start seeing large organizations purchase something, right? So a larger fish comes in and eats the smaller fish, right? Then that's something that you really need to be integrating into whatever your industry is. And lastly, the other real road sign there from a technology standpoint is the number of clients, either clients if it's B2B, or the number of peers that you hear are going to that particular technology. My rule is if you hear of more than 3 in your sphere, then it's something that you need to start looking at, considering, or finding an alternative for.
Okay. And I will say I'm as you might remember or know, I'm really big into private bootstrapped companies. And I think the latter things that you're talking about really do resonate with those type of companies versus, Series A is a very public thing, but you don't see when a bootstrapped company is doing like really, really well because there's no hurrah for that. There should be, but there really isn't. And in a Series A, I was in the chat where I was talking to a company that I've been, I would say working with, but talking to in certain areas, got about $28 million on a Series A in June. And of course, it's in generative AI. So, and that's everything is getting money there if you're halfway decent. And I think they were founded by 3 former Google employees. So when you're a bootstrap company, the latter really works. If you hear people talking about that company, but you don't see anything in those periodicals, and you might be seeing them there, but you don't necessarily see them on like VentureBeat or something like TechCrunch or whatever that all this PR is coming out, because the PR is to try to get you to 10x that Series A to get to the Series B and make some money for some other people too. But if you're looking at bootstrap companies, what Roger was saying is really does resonate. If those companies are getting, there's one other thing. If those companies if you're hearing about those companies, it might be something you want to get into if you have the assets, or it's something you might want to adopt to get into it. Also, if you have, if you look at their employee numbers, specifically when you're talking about bootstrap, as long as they're making money, employee count can be interesting. They're not burning through capital to find the next.
Well, I mean, I would argue that because in the technology space, it's not really employee count typically, because it's SaaS model and basically you're not producing any. Hold on.
Not when your services. When your services versus SaaS, and headcount counts, because that head count becomes billable hours or project based.
Yeah, but usually you've got a pretty large base already if you're going there. Like if you're in a bootstrap seed phase or Series A phase or whatever, I would say maybe the trigger would be when they go from 8 to 10 employees to 100 employees.
You're talking about a company I'm exactly thinking about when I'm doing this. That went from like 20 to 50 to 100 to 200 in 3 or 4 years. To me, when there's no other financials or other, you don't know what they're making, but when what you're looking
they'll announce it. They'll announce it. If there's a company that's a startup and they've got $28 million investment, you better bet your bacon.
I'm talking pure bootstrapped, no funding whatsoever. That's what I'm saying. Those can be different, right? If you're series, or if you're trying to find seed, or you have angel investors and you're trying to get more money, you absolutely will hear all kinds of stuff. But the bootstrap companies that are not looking for funding, that are interesting companies that might shift the market, you need to look at other triggers too, because you're just not going to see that PR. And they don't always advertise, hey, we now have 200 people. We have 100 people. So some do, some don't. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of bootstrap companies where you're not going to see those indicators of, okay, yeah, this is interesting and this might be market changing. So that I've experienced that. I won't say not necessarily myself yet, but hopefully soon. But I've definitely seen it in a couple of different industries where I know they're not taking on money, but I also know a lot about their teams and I know how much they're growing. And that's why I'm like, there's a couple of companies specifically in mind that are kind of shifting they're trying to build an entire new vertical, and they're doing it, and it's amazing, and it's all bootstrapped. So yeah, it's something else to know. But your last notes on venture-based companies still resonate.
All right, so we kind of talked about technology and when you should become aware of these folks, right? So let's talk about by your own numbers. So not just what everybody else is saying, right? Or what those external factors are, but by your own numbers, what if you're looking at yourself internally, what should indicate to you that you need to pivot? So one thing for me is a lot of people, unfortunately, in business, they're looking at the cost side of an equation constantly, right? And you need to be cost conscious, and you should have benchmarks or KPIs for your managers that are based out of reduction of cost. However, if a business is doing poorly, yes, you are going to have to trim some fat, but that you shouldn't trim. It shouldn't all come from the cost side of the equation. You need to focus on revenue, right? How can you generate revenue? And revenue is all about your profit margins. If you have something that's making less than 15% margins, you should either consider cutting the product, unless it's a loss leader for you that leads into heavier products, right? Or you've got to reevaluate how you do that product, right? How you produce that product, how many people are involved, and make sure that your time is incorporated into that, because that's something that a lot of people miss, is they just focus on the hard costs. Okay, I've got this software license that I got to have for my developer. They've got the XYZ, and for that product to work, you have to have the developer's time, the salesperson's expense in there, and that's not just the commission, because there's opportunity costs there too. You've got to be thinking about who's going to be servicing, deploying, or onboarding, because that's also part of that cost, right? You've got to be incorporating, and this is the difference between ABC costing. Are you familiar with what ABC costing is, Josh?
Not sure off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'd have to get more details.
So that's an accounting. It's a way of doing accounting, right? So there's ABC costing, and then there's not an ABC basic.
I'm usually just cash or accrual. That's as far as I get.
Well, I mean, yeah, cash and accrual accounting is important, right? Accrual accounting is really what you need. Cash, you need cash flows, but you need to break that up into accrual accounting so you understand what you're actually bringing in every month, instead of just looking at it from a contract cash value.
Yeah.
Because you're not getting all that money right up front.
No, because I actually literally just did some of my books and look at the difference between cash and accrual reports on a P&L and went, whoa, I have a lot of invoices people need to pay. So I actually haven't gotten that deep yet. And I agree with everything you're saying. I just personally haven't gotten that deep yet. Right now, I'm in the relatively new help as many people as possible and figure it out next year. I'm not even going to lie. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So for ABC costing, what that's doing is it's activity-based costing. So you're looking at what each activity costs, right? How much does your accountant do on each transaction? What are each one of those activities along that process from inception all the way through, paying off the contract, right? And taking each one of those pieces and all of those support departments, right? So those cost centers, you have to look at what they do and assign part of their cost based on the time it takes for your particular product and assign it to that product as well. So again, at the end of the day, if you're seeing certain products that are, when you're going through this ABC, that take more time, you either need to pivot to get your margins, right? You need to either pivot to get your margins or get rid of that particular product. That's the efficiency. So if you pivot and you want to adjust, those activities, a great way to do that is through technology, right? Are there things that you are manually doing that you could, increase the speed of delivery? Because if you increase the speed of delivery, you have the same amount of people, you can produce more, which means you're making more money with the same amount of resources. So at that point, again, that 15% margin is a big red flag to me. Anything where people, we talk about critical points on the show before, but understanding where in those points in the process, anywhere where people, if someone does something wrong, or there is a great variety of performance based on the people that are there, then that's either a people change, an upskill opportunity, or a wholesale process change, right? Depending on what type of thing that you're doing. So that is another pivot point where you need to look at and say, big red letters, hey, we need to pivot here. either from a people, from a skill, or from a process position. So those are all things that you need to be looking at pivoting. And then from the external factors side, how are you competing? What's what are your competitors doing? And then what could you offer that's different than your competitors? You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, or else you will get stuck in the quagmire and you will not move forward in the business. So, Josh,
Yeah.
And part of that, make sure you're looking at that at least monthly. And there's technology out there there's technology that once you put it out there, it'll monitor it for you. That goes back to our tech stack conversation. Have something that has timestamps so that you don't have to manually do that. All right, I'm going to be backing off the brakes here and let you go forward with that.
Well, no, you being on the gas is a good thing, because this is like the reason I'm laughing is like, is this what I'm going to have to do in 3 and 5 years when
you're going to have to do that before.
Well, I would say
you will. If you keep growing at the pace that we've been talking about you growing, you're going to have to do it. The complexity of the organization will be there.
Yeah.
And you will be limiting your growth.
Yeah.
If you don't do that.
Yeah.
And look at that. So
yeah. And that's an interesting. I agree with you. And listen, when I started Tech Think Tank full throttle, I wasn't sure what I was going to get myself into, but I have a nice whiteboard back here that gave me all the things I want to do, and a lot of the things are actually happening. So I do need to do a lot of these things myself in order to move forward and be more organized as a business. But to your point, when the resources that are doing this costing and making these funds are myself and a couple of other people working on the team, right now, I know what the profit margin generally looks like, and it's good, which is wonderful, because it does two things. One, we can help a heck of a lot of people, mostly in the nonprofit industry, but do things that bigger companies don't even want to do because it's, quote, not worth their time for the funding and money we're doing. But to get more formalized and organized, to hire, to scale, to grow, you're right. So that was my in my head. I'm like, that's going to be my future life, not just doing the business development and sales.
That's when Josh calls me and says, all right, let's do a consulting engagement.
Yeah. So
I'm curious. I've done it for others, including members of the show before. But
absolutely. And well, see, here's the thing. So by my own numbers, I'm at the point where I actually need to start caring about them, to be truthful, because I'm looking in year end. I'm trying to figure out, I might be talking to more than one accountant to figure out, can I spend money on things so I can lower my tax basis? So there's some of that stuff. But there's really, I'm getting to the point where I actually have to do many of these things. And that's actually, it's refreshing, because I'm doing well enough to do that as a company.
That means you're getting to the point where you need to start paying others to do it for you, because your cup is only so full.
Yeah. And as we talked offline, before I can do that, I need to figure out what I'm spending most of my time on, and figure out how I can expand the things that bring in more revenue and honestly, delight me.
Focus is your F word, Josh. We know
it is. But yeah, that's kind of where so by my own numbers personally, there's no pivot yet. It's organization. So maybe if you're in that same situation where you have a side hustle, and that side hustle is becoming so big that it can replace your main role, then maybe you need to kind of look at what these numbers, maybe you need to do what I need to do, versus where Roger's at, and what Roger's at with like bigger companies making bigger dollars, and then you have that side of the equation too. But to me, understanding I understand where the money is flowing in my organization. I understand how much my resources are costing, and before I even have the SaaS models of software being developed and coming to market, which is happening soon. So I think when I get more to that, I will probably get really deeper into, okay, how much is every user costing, and kind of understanding what my profit margin is per user per engagement. So yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and talk about your team and how it impacts your pivot. So one of the things that's important when you're pivoting is understanding how it impacts your team, right? And whether your team is capable of pivoting. Do you have the workforce that can work with the technology that you need to integrate to be competitive or successful or reduce cost or whatever, right? That's one thing. Two, is your workforce open to change? Have you created a change culture? So I'm going to kind of merge two conversations because the lines kind of blur here. You hear us talk about change cultures all the time. Are they open to change? Are you empowering them to change? Because if they are empowered to change, they're going to accept change because change is the norm. People are creatures of habit and they don't like change. It's threatening, right? And unless you've built a culture of change where the expectation is we're constantly changing. And by that, I don't mean major shifts, because you don't want to be Mr. CEO that walks on the floor one day and says, we're changing everything. And then 2 months later, we're changing everything again. And you haven't had enough time to integrate the change that you just did previously, because then it becomes a mess because you haven't taken the time to think about it. And then also timing of your pivot. Make sure you have a plan before you introduce a change, if it's a big one, right? Get all of the people that are associated with that particular change in any part of that transaction and have them have a say, right? Get all of your department heads, if you're a larger organization, together. Even if this is one of the things we did in all project management, is we'd get all the department heads together and say, this is what we're planning on doing. If your team is going to be impacted in any way, stay at the meeting. Otherwise, you're free to leave and you get your time back, right? Because it gives them an opportunity. Because unintended consequences at scale, if you have a small brain trust, can really, really wreck what you're doing. I've seen that at mid to large size organizations. So make sure you're fostering your team. And again, if your team is empowered, if your team is used to driving change, if their ideas are heard, if you're focusing, that F word, time on change, then they will incorporate change and be more open to it. So go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we haven't had major pivots in our team, but we have pivoted in project idea and scope. And what we actually ended up doing, so we have focus is the F word. We had about 4 things we were building. One was GoldenKnightsClub.com. We did with some interns during UCF interns during a summer session. And we've been paying.
It's still open, by the way.
Still open, by the way. Yeah, go add yourself to it. And so we went and we were building something that should probably go to market next couple of days. The days I wish, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe early November. But we're trying to do this in October. But I kind of felt that the resource was that doing this, that they were a little, I won't say burnt out, but they wanted to move on to something else. So what I ended up doing is bringing on another resource to work on another project, because again, focus is my F word. But I basically try to do 2 things. And they may know this, may not. If they watch it live, I don't mind. I brought someone on who had some great skills and great ideas. And my whole goal was to kind of have that resource take a small amount of time and finish up the other project. And so those 2, once that was done, and we're talking this month should be go to market, those 2 working together on another project. So I can pivot.
Let me ask you a silly question, though.
Yes.
So if you have someone that comes into the back end, and this is especially important in the development world, you have someone come into the back end of the project. It is very difficult for another developer to come in and try to finish a project. They don't know where the developer was heading with it. They don't know what the original vision was, the bones of how it was built.
We have for what it is, so if you have a question, we'll get to that. I will tell you how I resolved that. So we actually built something into the process that made that transition a little bit easier. So again, this isn't what we're building isn't like game-changing.
What did you build into
software.
it?
Oh,
What
so
did
what did we build? Yeah, absolutely. So you are correct. Someone coming in without a lot of knowledge, it can be tough, especially if it's deep software. This isn't that yet. We're at MVP stage. But what we did was built out an entire strategic plan, not the same strategic plan you would think of as a regular business, but what was the impetus of, I'll pull up the document. What was the impetus of this idea? What was so basically, and this developer is very business savvy, so we can talk beyond code. So I built a strategic plan type document that
was it a project plan?
Not exactly.
It sounds like a agile project plan is what it sounds like.
Maybe, but we basically I talked through the pain points and how we started. Then I talked about what the pain relief would be, talking very business model canvas like, right? Then we basically talked about the core piece of the puzzle that hopefully is patent pending. We're working on that to address that pain point. Then we talked about shorter and longer term goals. So yeah, it might be an agile project strategic plan, but we put that together so you understood kind of what was going on. And then we started building in, okay, so who is the ICP or the target audience and functionality.
Insane Clown Posse?
No. Initial customer profile.
I know what it is, but you remember how we talked about throwing acronyms around?
TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. Yeah, you're right. But so that document, when passed over to a business-focused, someone who is entrepreneur-based developer, allowed them to come in and go, oh. And then what I've also done, and I've done a lot more of this, instead of just text-based communications or async, I'm starting to do videos with what I'm thinking and looking at and doing. And what used to be a back and forth conversation on Discord or Slack or something like that, shortened down to a 5-minute, this is what I'm talking about video. This is speeding up development time.
Hold on, Josh, you are actually capable of 5-minute videos?
I am. I'm capable of shorts on YouTube. If you look at it, other YouTube.
Well, yes, that's true. We got you down to 1 minute on those.
Yeah, I can tighten things up if I need to, but sometimes I like being verbose. No.
All right. Yeah, no, not you, Josh.
No.
Okay, so again, your team affects your pivot, right? So
yes,
whether they're prepared for it, whether you have the skill set to pivot to that technology, do you, and this is how you should evaluate it. What do you need to do? What are you trying to do? Once you've decided on a path to get there, what do you need to do to get there? You need to do a skills inventory. You need to do a technology inventory. And that technology inventory means anytime you change technology in an ecosystem, 9 times out of 10, it's not plug and play. It's going to impact something else. So when you're out there looking for a technology to fulfill that need, make sure you're thinking about your tech stack as you're making those decisions. What technology do you already have? Does it integrate easily? Do you have to use something like starts with a Z? We're not talking about Alan's Smarty Pants marketing. I can't remember why I can't think of it. The API connector marketplace that they have out there. You know what I'm talking about.
You mean Zapier or
Zapier? Yeah. Zapier. See, I told you it starts with a Z. Yeah. Zapier, because again, it may not matter as much at the beginning, right? But as you grow and you have more transactions, each time that Zapier pings, there's going to be a cost on your side, right? Yeah. So is it open? Is it open-ended API or open-headed API? Is that the case? Because you're going to want to make changes later on. What how does that work? Is it a JSON feed? How is it passing that data back and forth? All of those things are things that you should consider, because the end user experience, whether it be internal or external, will be impacted by that. So make sure you're thinking about your tech stack. So again, to recap, what are you trying to solve? Who's going to be involved? Do you have the skill sets in order to do this? Do you have the tech stack in order to do this? And what does your timeline look like? Is this something that is worthwhile that's going to make a material difference? So, the smaller business owners may not know or do what's called an IRR, but for larger organizations, they're going to look at something called an IRR. And basically, the threshold is if it's going to make 80% chance of profitability, then you go forward with it. If not, if it doesn't meet that litmus test, then don't go forward with the technology or process or whatever. And then the last thing is, what is that going to do for your net promoter score? In other words, is this going to be something that your clients are going to be happy with this change? Or can you execute it effectively enough that it doesn't completely disrupt so you lose all your clients, right? And is it going to positively impact them? Are they more likely to recommend you after this change or less likely, right? If it's front facing. So client experience is something that you should consider as well. So quick fives, the 5 questions you need to ask, right? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you have the people? Do you have the skill sets? Do you have the tech stack, and how is it going to impact that? And how is it going to affect your end user? Those are the 5 questions you need to be asking in any project that you take on, not just technology based. All right. Last thing on our list for this week. This is blown by really fast.
Yeah.
Pivots. How can change culture help with pivots? So Josh, in 3 minutes or less, how can change culture help, or having a change culture help with pivoting?
Well, if it's not something that's out of the blue, if your pivot or how you're going to change what you're doing is something that's kind of built into how you work, that can help. So if you have a very adaptive culture, if you're into experimenting with different ideas, this is a lot from the software development side of what we're doing. There's a lot of things that can lead to that culture being both accepting of that change. If you are, we'll use Blockbuster. You sell DVDs and VHS in physical stores, and this is what you do. And when given the opportunity to change or acquire someone when you are the bully in the room, and you don't do that, well, maybe you'll have your lunch eaten, and the last one of you is somewhere up in Oregon, which I think that last Blockbuster is now gone. So if this is not,
are you sure you aren't referencing the TV show Blockbuster in that?
No, I'm pretty sure there was one Blockbuster left, and John Oliver sent some regalia from a movie to it to try to keep it alive. I think it was that one says Beaverton, but that we can't. I'll Google. I should say I will search for it.
He will put it in the notes.
I will put it in the notes.
All right.
But that's if you are a culture of this is what we do, and we're not even going to experiment or innovate or look at that. Then if you must pivot, you're going to have a hard time. So I think having when you have a culture within your organization that experimentation is okay within certain either times or areas, but experimentation is okay, innovation is okay. This is things that we do. If you're doing that all the time, if you need to make a hard pivot, you're probably going to find less resistance. So right. I think a flexible culture of how you do your business can be very worthwhile, and how change culture can help you pivot as a business.
So I think from a pivoting perspective and your ability to change and how rapidly you can change, right? Yeah. If you have a workforce that is part of the pivot, meaning they are constantly changing, they are empowered to change. They have already accepted it, right? And that's the biggest hump to get over. Why are we changing? I'm having to relearn. I'm blah, 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 blah. And insert that there, right? That's number one. From a process perspective, so that's a people perspective. From a process perspective, you've already got it canonized on how you drive change within an organization. What do those rails look like, right? In a change culture, you've built that into who you are and what you do. So you have a way of doing this successfully, and the more practice makes perfect, and the more you do it, the better off that you are. You also learn how to implement without impacting negatively your clients. One, are you messaging any service outages during the change? Because when you flip the switch, You need to be strategic when you're doing it, right? You need to tell your customers about it, because if something goes wrong during implementation and you have to revert, that can go really, really wrong. If you can't do that quickly, and most of those flips of switches aren't fast. 3, what does that do? Put you have your timelines in place, right? So usually when you're switching to a new technology, you're getting rid of another one, which means that you pay up to a certain date for that particular project. Are your timelines going to give you enough time to be ready for the implementation process before you have to flip the switch, or pay for a 30-day extension that's going to be exorbitantly high because you're leaving anyway, right? So that's what those people do. So you've got to make sure you've got that in place. So having that change culture in place gives you the process, gives you the skill set for the people, allows them to accept the change, gives you the practice for your clients to make sure you not do it perfectly, because no implementation is perfect. I hate to tell people, it's just like the shuttle. Every time the shuttle went up, over 4 million different parts had to work together in unison. However, there was never a shuttle launch where they had less than 100 errors during a shuttle launch, right? So making sure you have that process in place to be able to do that. And then lastly, just having the approach so that you're looking for ways to pivot continuously in leadership, because you want your leadership team and you want your average person to be able to look at that and identify, hey, my part of the business, this is a big thing that's coming, or this is a threat that we need to take care of, or hey, we need to have eyes on our costs so that we can start reducing that cost without cutting people. And that way we're more profitable, right? And by doing that, it's a force multiplier. All right, Josh, we're at 107.
Woohoo!
All right. So
that's why we have 22 hours of content instead of 20.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that isn't the only reason. We had some great guests, and we let them go a little bit longer. Speaking of which, last week's episode, if you missed that, great episode.
Yeah.
He's going to be coming back. We'll have some more episodes with him as well. Guy was great. And yes, that's his actual name. I'm not just calling him a guy. Guy is his name. And he was great. So as we said, goldenknightsclub.com. Make sure you're checking that out for your Knights marketplace for any services that you may need. Make sure you're supporting the incubator program. Make sure that you're helping folks, find, if you're a successful business person or owner, find the hour every 2 weeks to meet with someone who's learning, right? The incubator program can help you with that mentorship piece of it. And outside of that, make sure for us, you like, subscribe, and grind. And Josh, where can people find you and what do you do?
Hey, I'm Josh Lazar. I'm the CEO of Tech Think Tank. We do a lot of technology services and software development. We focus a little bit on the nonprofit space, but we've done all those services and development for other industries as well. You can find me, Josh, at techthinktank.com is the best way to do that. You can see me on Twitter and some other places too. LinkedIn is where I'm really the most social. You'll see me posting almost daily. But you can find me there or go to techthinktank.com. Yeah, if you have any technology needs, assessments, operational assessments or alignment, or want to build the next Uber, well, maybe we can't go that far. But if you want to build something, let us know.
All right, great. And I'm Roger Phipps, and for all of your marketing needs in small business, legal, medical, higher education, video production, 3D animation, and VR, XR, we can do that too. That's 7 Lights Marketing. You can reach me there at r.phipps@7lights-agency.com or check out our website. For your consulting needs, you can reach me at bossleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. You can also, if you have any business lending needs, I can help with that as well. I have access to lenders and alternative lenders. And you can reach me at bossleadershipsolutions@gmail.com for that as well. And as always, UBT Live, you can reach us at ubtlive@gmail.com. Thank you so much. We actually have, just for something forward looking, we actually are working with the incubator program again, and they're going to start allowing us to showcase more successful nights and currently nights that are becoming entrepreneurs. So I'm excited about
Great.
that. And if you need anything at all, you know where to reach me. We appreciate you. And as always, like, subscribe, and grind.
See, that's what why improv training does. It allows me to mirror people. It's really